I didn't feel myself die. I noticed everything else stop. One moment there was pressure in my chest, sharp and tight, like a fist closing from the inside. The next moment there was no pain at all. No panic. Just a sudden, clean silence. As if someone had cut the power to the world but left me awake. My name is Daniel Slimp. I was 46 years old when this happened. I had a job, a family, habits, opinions. None of that mattered once my heart stopped. What mattered was that I was still aware. Fully aware. More aware than I had ever been while alive. I understood very quickly that my body was finished. Not in a dramatic way. It was like realizing a machine had shut down and wasn't coming back on. There was no denial in me. No bargaining. Just recognition. What disturbed me wasn't death itself. It was how close something else felt. There was a sense of proximity. Like standing inches from a door you hadn't noticed before. I didn't see it yet, but I knew it was there. Whatever was beyond it felt ordered. Intentional. Not vague or dreamy. It felt exact. I also knew something else, and this part still unsettles me. I knew I was being measured. Not judged in words. Not accused. Just seen. Completely. Every motive, every quiet choice, every excuse I'd ever made was present all at once. There was nowhere to angle myself. Nowhere to hide behind explanations. I didn't feel condemned. I didn't feel safe either. The awareness of death lasted only seconds, maybe less. Time didn't behave normally anymore. But the understanding was instant and absolute. I was no longer alive. And I was not alone. That was the moment I realized returning would be harder than dying. Before that day, my life looked stable. Ordinary. The kind of life people nod at and say, "You're doing fine." I worked in logistics. Long hours, predictable stress. I complained about traffic, deadlines, the price of groceries. I drank too much coffee. I scrolled on my phone at night instead of sleeping. I told myself I'd slow down later. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't heroic. I was decent in the way most people are decent. I paid my bills. I showed up. I didn't think of myself as selfish, even though most of my thoughts circled back to my own comfort and plans. Faith was something I kept at arm's length. I grew up around it, absorbed just enough to be familiar, not enough to be transformed. I believed in God in a general way. I believed Jesus existed. I also believed that belief itself was the main thing. That being basically good would cover the rest. I thought heaven was distant, abstract, a place you think about at funerals, then put back on a shelf. Death felt theoretical, something that happened to other people, older people, unlucky people. The day it happened wasn't special. No arguments, no emotional build-up. I woke up tired, skipped breakfast, rushed out the door. I remember thinking about a meeting I didn't want to attend. I remember being annoyed at nothing in particular. Looking back, that's what frightens me most. Nothing was wrong. There were no signs. No sense of warning. Life didn't slow down or hint at what was coming. It moved forward like it always did, right up to the moment it didn't. If you'd asked me that morning whether I was ready to die, I would have laughed. Not out of confidence. Out of assumption. I thought I had time. It happened in my car. I was stopped at a light, foot on the brake, radio low. I remember checking the time and feeling irritated that I was already behind schedule. Then there was a pressure in my chest, sudden and deep, like something collapsing inward. I tried to inhale. The air didn't help. My vision narrowed, not to black, but to sharp clarity. Sounds stretched and then thinned out. The steering wheel felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I didn't think, "I'm dying." I thought, "This isn't right." My hands twitched. My jaw tightened. There was a brief surge of fear, but it didn't have anywhere to go. My body wasn't responding fast enough to panic properly. The pain peaked and then vanished. That's important. The pain didn't fade. It stopped, like a switch flipped. I was aware of my heart missing a beat. Then another. Then nothing. The car rolled slightly forward before settling. I was still seated, still upright, but I wasn't inside myself anymore. The moment my heart stopped, I didn't drift or float. I stepped out of something, without moving. Awareness separated from flesh as cleanly as removing a glove. I could see my body, my face slack, eyes unfocused, hands resting uselessly on my lap. It didn't look dramatic. It looked empty. There was no confusion about what had happened. I was dead. And yet, I felt more present than I ever had while alive. Being outside my body didn't feel like floating above it. It felt like standing exactly where I'd always been, just without weight, without resistance. I could see the car clearly. The dashboard lights still on. The red traffic signal ahead. A driver in the next lane glancing over, confused. Everything looked normal, and that made it unsettling. The world hadn't reacted yet. My body looked smaller than I expected. Fragile, like something that had always been temporary, and I'd somehow missed that fact. I didn't feel attached to it anymore. No instinct to return. No fear about leaving it behind. What surprised me was how sharp my awareness was. I noticed details I'd never paid attention to before. The faint hum of electricity in the traffic lights. The way light reflected off dust in the air. It wasn't overwhelming. It was precise. Then the sense of being watched returned. Stronger now. Not watched like someone spying. Watched like someone fully present. Completely attentive. There was no direction to it. It wasn't coming from behind me or above me. It surrounded me without enclosing me. I understood something without being told. This awareness wasn't interested in my excuses. It wasn't angry. It wasn't impressed. It simply knew me. I felt exposed, but not humiliated. More like standing in bright light after years of dim rooms. The street began to lose relevance. Sounds muted. Colors softened. The scene loosened its grip on me, as if it had fulfilled its purpose. I realized I was being moved, not pulled, not pushed. Allowed to go somewhere else. There was no tunnel, no rush, just a steady shift away from the physical world, like stepping out of shallow water onto dry ground. And with that shift came a deep, quiet seriousness. Whatever was next mattered more than anything that had come before. I felt the presence before I saw anything. It was calm, but it carried weight. Not physical weight, moral weight. The kind that makes you straighten without knowing why. The space around me wasn't dark or bright. It was clear, empty, but not hollow. Then the presence resolved into form, not suddenly, but inevitably, as if my ability to see finally caught up with what was already there. I knew who he was before my mind formed the name. Jesus didn't look fragile or distant. He didn't glow. He didn't smile. He stood with quiet authority, like someone who doesn't need to prove anything. His eyes were what held me. They weren't gentle in the way people imagine. They were honest, completely honest. There was compassion there, but it wasn't soft. It was steady. He didn't speak right away. And in that silence, everything I'd ever done rose to the surface. Not as images, but as truth. Why I'd done things. What I'd avoided. Where I'd chosen comfort over integrity. I wanted to explain myself. The urge was automatic. But I realized words would only weaken what was already clear. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It didn't echo. It landed. "You believed you were close," he said. That sentence hit harder than any accusation could have. I had believed that. I had assumed proximity without understanding what closeness meant. I felt no anger from him. No disappointment either. Just clarity. I thought belief was agreement. I thought believing meant acknowledging truth, nodding at it, keeping it nearby. I thought faith was a position you held, not a direction you moved. Jesus showed me that belief, as I'd lived it, was distance disguised as familiarity. He didn't lecture me. He didn't list rules. He simply let me see the shape of my life from a perspective I'd never had. I saw how often I had chosen the easiest version of good. How often I'd avoided discomfort and called it wisdom. How often I'd kept God as an idea instead of a center. I realized something painful. I had built a life that looked aligned from the outside. Respectable, stable, but inwardly, it revolved around me. Jesus looked at me, and I felt something crack open. Not guilt, recognition. "Many speak my name," he said calmly. Few moved toward me. That distinction mattered. I had spoken. I had agreed. I had assumed that was enough. What I hadn't done was surrender direction. I hadn't allowed my life to be reordered. I hadn't wanted disruption. The correction wasn't harsh. It was precise. I understood then that closeness wasn't about effort or performance. It was about orientation. About what you turn toward when no one is watching. I felt exposed again, but this time with hope mixed in. Not reassurance. Opportunity. I was standing closer to truth than I ever had before. and I didn't know yet whether I would be allowed to stay. The space around us shifted without warning. I wasn't moved forward or backward. The scene simply changed. Suddenly, I was standing between two paths. They weren't labeled. They weren't dramatic. They didn't glow or threaten. Both looked walkable. The path on the left was wide, smooth, familiar. It reminded me of streets I'd already walked in life. It felt efficient, reasonable. You could move quickly there without thinking too much. The path on the right was narrower, not dangerous, but uneven. It required attention. You couldn't walk it while distracted. I wasn't told which was which. No explanation came with the image. But I felt the difference immediately. The wider path carried noise. Not sound exactly, but activity. Motion without depth. I sensed many people there, moving confidently, rarely stopping. They weren't lost. They were busy. The narrow path was quieter. Not empty, but focused. Those on it moved slower. Some stumbled. Some paused often. But there was intention in every step. What unsettled me was this. Both paths felt voluntary. No one was forced onto either one. No barriers blocked entry. The difference wasn't permission. It was preference. I realized how often in my life I'd chosen width over depth, ease over attention, movement over direction. Jesus didn't point. He didn't instruct. He only stood with me long enough for understanding to form. Choice wasn't about belief. It was about what you repeatedly stepped toward. The wide path dissolved, and I was shown something else. A place that looked safe. It resembled comfort. Warm light. Soft edges. People resting. Smiling. Everything about it suggested arrival, like the work was done and nothing more was required. At first glance, it felt relieving. But then I noticed the stillness. No growth. No direction. Just maintenance. The people there weren't suffering, but they weren't alive in any deep sense either. Their expressions were relaxed, but empty. Content without awareness. I sensed that many believed they had reached the destination. That was the illusion. The safety wasn't evil. That's what made it dangerous. It was close enough to peace to be mistaken for it. Close enough to fulfillment to stop searching. I understood without being told. This was where certainty replaced humility, where comfort replaced transformation. Jesus didn't criticize the place. He didn't condemn the people. He simply let me feel the absence underneath the calm. Nothing was being asked of them anymore. Nothing was being given either. I felt a quiet grief then. Not fear. Loss. The loss of what could have been, exchanged for what felt good enough. And I knew how easily I could have ended up there. I already had, in many ways. The final vision was the hardest to look at. I saw lives. Not faces clearly, but patterns. Actions layered over intentions. Words layered over motives. Everything people showed contrasted with what drove them. Some lives looked impressive, productive, influential, admired. But inside, they were hollow. Not malicious, just misaligned. Other lives looked small, unremarkable, easily overlooked. But inside, there was weight, substance, a gravity that came from consistency, not visibility. What mattered wasn't intensity. It was honesty. I saw how often I'd curated my outer life to feel settled while leaving my inner life unattended. How I'd confused reputation with direction. How I'd measured myself by comparison instead of truth. Jesus finally spoke again. What is seen convinces people, he said quietly. What is true shapes eternity. That sentence didn't accuse me. It corrected my scale. I understood then why so few entered closely. Not because the way was hidden, but because it required alignment instead of appearance. It required letting go of what looks right to choose what is right. The vision faded, but the understanding stayed. And I felt time press in on me for the first time since I'd died. The pressure didn't come from fear. It came from importance. Time returned, not as seconds or minutes, but as weight. A sense that movement was still possible, but not indefinitely. That something was open now that would not always remain open. Jesus didn't say hurry. He didn't say soon. He let me feel how fragile opportunity is. I became aware of how quickly people confuse delay with permission. How often later quietly turns into never without announcing itself. I saw moments in my life where something had asked for response, and I'd postponed it until the asking faded. Not rejected, just ignored long enough to disappear. I understood that urgency wasn't about fear of punishment. It was about the nature of time itself. Time doesn't argue. It doesn't threaten. It just passes. Jesus looked at me with the same steady clarity as before. What you turn toward now, he said, shapes what you are becoming. Not will shape, is shaping. The warning wasn't dramatic. That's what made it serious. There was no sense of doom. Only consequence. Quiet, unavoidable consequence. I felt a pull then. Subtle but firm. Like gravity shifting direction. The space around us thinned, as if the moment itself was closing. I knew something was ending, though I didn't know whether it was my chance to stay or my chance to return. I wanted to ask questions. Thousands of them. But questions suddenly felt small. Only direction mattered. The return was violent. Not in emotion, but in sensation. Awareness collapsed back into weight. Into pain. Into resistance. It felt like being forced into a space that no longer fit. My chest seized. My lungs burned. There was a sharp jolt, then another. Sound crashed in all at once. Voices. Shouting. The blare of a horn somewhere nearby. I felt hands on me. Pressure. A shock that ripped through my body and dragged breath back into my lungs against my will. I didn't want to return. Not because life was bad, but because clarity was being taken from me. The moment awareness fully reconnected with my body, confusion rushed in. Memory dulled. The sharpness faded. The sense of presence retreated, not gone, but distant. Pain replaced meaning. I gasped and coughed, body rebelling, heart stuttering back into rhythm. Someone was yelling my name. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I was mourning something I couldn't explain. As they lifted me onto a stretcher, the world looked flatter. Heavier. Less precise. But not meaningless. That distinction mattered. I don't tell this story to convince you of anything. I don't know how it will land for you. I only know how it changed me. What stayed with me wasn't fear of death. It was clarity about life. About how easily we drift while thinking we're standing still. About how familiarity can quietly replace honesty. I used to think closeness was about agreement. About being near the right ideas. Near the right language. I don't think that anymore. Closeness is about direction. About what you turn toward when no one is correcting you. When nothing forces your hand. Most people aren't choosing against truth. They're choosing comfort and calling it harmless. I did. I still have a life now. Ordinary again in many ways. Work. Conversations. Noise. But something underneath has changed. I don't feel special. I feel accountable. Not watched. Not threatened. Just aware that alignment matters more than appearance, and delay matters more than we think. That door I felt near hasn't left my awareness. And I don't assume proximity anymore.